Tim is going to host and talk about how to transition to a plant-based diet, as you already know. That's why you're here. But yeah, thank you, enjoy, and there'll be a question and answer session at the end, so please get involved. Seize the opportunity to ask all your questions, and enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, so welcome. It's our first event here, so it's pleasing to be the first one. Slightly nervous about that as well, but hopefully you'll enjoy what I've got to say. I think it's a great opportunity for everyone to get together face to face, much rather than talking to real people and doing webinars and enough of that in the last few months. So a little bit about me. I am a nutrition coach. I run a little company called Food Flexibility, and that is all about having a really flexible approach to our nutrition to make sure that we're turning up energized, ready to perform, whether that's like at home, in our family lives, at work, on the sports pitch, in the gym, whatever your passion is. And just enjoying that process. I really enjoy my food. I want everyone to enjoy their food. I think there's enough nonsense in the health and fitness industry about restriction, and I really want to come away from that. Kind of the reason for doing the talk, I guess a little bit about me. I've mentioned to a few of you already, I'm not a vegan. I do follow quite heavily plant-based diet, but I'm pretty much an omnivore. I will eat anything. My passion is around kind of helping everyone just to get the most out of what they're eating, and I think loads of people are transitioning towards a plant-based diet for all of the right reasons, and those are all very personal to everyone. But I can see that if that's not necessarily planned in advance and you haven't been doing it for a long time, there's possibly a few little gaps that just might need filling in. And I just want to help out by sort of helping you identify what those are, giving you some little tools, tips and tricks, just to make sure that you're getting everything out of the food that you're eating and enjoying it, really. And I guess the overall philosophy is just one of doing the best that we can. So personally, reduced my animal produce consumption a bit. I've gone for more local options. That's my take on it. Everyone's going to be different. A few people were talking about maybe like taking notes and things and tips and tricks I'm going to give out. I have written a blog on the subject, and this talk is heavily based on that blog. So I'll give you guys all the details of that later on, so you can look up everything I've got to say. It's got all the numbers and facts and things in there. But I'll base the talk on that. I'll try and be maybe half an hour. If there's any burning questions while I go through, stop me. If not, we'll save them for the end, because I want to try and have like half an hour at the end where we can just get really interactive, ask questions, share some experiences and all that good stuff. Is that okay with everyone? Cool. So I remember everything. I've just got my little tips and tricks written down. To kick things off, I already said I'm a bit of an omnivore, and I think I'll just define a few different terms and then maybe ask you, like by a show of hands, what your sort of diet style is. So I would define a typical vegan diet as just does not eat any animal products. A vegetarian diet, no meat, poultry or fish, but you might eat eggs, honey, dairy, etc. A pescatarian diet is the same as a vegetarian diet, but you have fish. And then a flexitarian diet is the same as vegetarian, but you go for sort of minimal amounts of animal produce. And I would probably describe myself as like a carnivorous flexitarian, if we want to call it that. So I'm probably at one end of the spectrum compared to some people. So just like by a show of hands, how many vegans would we say we got in here? A couple of you, 2, 3, yeah. More vegetarian based? Yeah, cool. Pescatarian? And then flexitarians? Just omnivores? Yeah, brilliant. Okay. So, one of the concepts I want to talk to you about, one of the tools I want to just put in your head for use later, and it is mentioned in my blog, but there's a lot of detail here. But one of the best ways that you can find out for yourself if there are any gaps in your nutrition, especially vitamins and minerals and things, which I'll talk about in a moment, is that there is an app called Chronometer. Now, it has a calorie tracking function, but it's not all about that. And it's basically, if you were to download the app, I'd say download it, use it for 3 days and delete it and never use it again, because you don't need this level of detail on a daily basis. But you can use it for 3 days to enter quite deliberately everything that you eat, and then it will give you a breakdown of all the vitamins and minerals in those foods against what you should be having for to help you thrive. And then you can basically spot the gaps. So for example, if you don't eat a lot of dairy, and you're worried you're not getting enough calcium, it's just going to say, well, this is 3 days worth of eating. You've either got enough calcium or you need to consider having some more. And then you can decide whether you get that from a food source, or if you don't like the foods that it comes from, that's the point to say, well, maybe I need to take a supplement pill. So it just gives you that education and empowerment to make that decision for yourself, because everyone eats different foods. So there's a tip I'd like to give you to take away with you. What I would say is, don't get obsessed with the app. Literally 3 days, delete it, don't use it again, because you don't need that level of detail. But for some people it's quite enlightening. So I think there's some major categories of nutrients that if we don't eat a lot of animal products or any at all, that we may be lacking in if we don't pay careful attention. So that's iron, calcium, zinc, vitamin B12, omega-3 fatty acids, protein, and then broadly speaking, I'm going to talk a little bit about calories, because sometimes we don't get enough on a plant-based diet. And I want to talk about fats, because that's another thing that we might not be getting enough of on a plant-based diet if we're not thinking about it carefully. And I'm just going to go through each one of those topics now and just give you some benefits of it, some foods they might include, and just some tips and tricks around that. So I think iron is one that possibly a lot of people are aware of. It's quite a common deficiency in all diets for people, whether they eat an omnivorous diet or not. It can result in anemia, which sometimes doesn't have any symptoms. Sometimes you get tiredness, even shortness of breath, pale skin, even heart palpitations. So iron deficiency can be quite serious, but sometimes it can go unnoticed. Animal-based sources, sort of the red meats and the livers. Plant-based eaters can get those from things like beans, nuts, whole grains, dark leafy vegetables. But with the plant-based sources, it's in a lower quantity, and sometimes it's a little bit difficult for your body to absorb. So we can do some things about that with the food sources. So something like leafy greens, if we cook them, we absorb the iron in them better. If we're, say, taking some spinach and popping it into a smoothie, sometimes it's better to just quickly blanch that in the microwave for a few seconds, just to give it that cooked element without overdoing it, and then blitzing up in your smoothie. It's also better absorbed if you have some citrus with that. So it might just be as simple as having a piece of fruit with your meal to absorb the iron from those veggie sources. It might be as simple as squeezing some lime juice if you make some sort of smoothie. The thing to say with iron deficiency is that lots of people ask me about this as a nutrition coach, and if you're worried, go and see your GP. They can do a really simple blood test. That won't be bothering them, because it's much better that you find out early and they can do things about it than it is to let it fester for too long, because then it becomes a bit of a problem for it. Moving on to calcium. So Liam's got some oat milk in the corner. We know they've done a good job with that, because I believe the oat milk here is fortified with calcium. But especially in the UK, a typical UK diet, lots of our calcium comes from dairy-based sources, sort of habitually. Calcium is important for your bones, important for blood clotting, to help your muscles contract properly. And when I say it's important for bones, it's your bone density, and it can help to prevent osteoporosis in later life, which is sort of brittle bones. So it's quite an important nutrient to get in. If you don't have dairy in your diet, as I said, you probably need to pay a little bit more attention. So calcium is present in leafy greens, it's present in tofu. But just because it's present, we shouldn't assume that there's enough in there, because I did a bit of Googling earlier, and if you were to try and get your 1,000 milligrams a day, you recommend a daily amount of calcium from spinach. You need to eat, I reckon, about a kilo. That's quite a lot. So it's just the devil's in the detail. The devil is always in the detail, and it's why I suggested the chronometer thing at the start. As I said, some plant-based milks are fortified with calcium. So they come with a label, check the label. I'm doing a little bit of work in here to try and get some labels on the products to help you guys, so that will come. And again, going back to that example of chronometer, if you're not quite sure, maybe plug a few foods in and just do a little bit of research and just check the detail, basically. I mentioned zinc. Zinc is important for cellular reproduction, for your immune system. helps your wounds heal if you cut yourself, things like that, and it helps us to process the energy that we get from our food. Typically, again, good sources of zinc in a non-plant-based diet will come from seafood, lean meat, poultry, and eggs. So if you're pescatarian, or you eat eggs and you're a vegetarian, there's going to be sources there. Plant-based sources, again, are sometimes a little harder to absorb, sometimes lower. If you pick a plant-based source of zinc, like legumes, which are pulses, or nuts that also contain a protein source, that's gonna help, because they're going to be higher in zinc, more easily absorbed. But if you don't particularly like any of those foods, maybe considering a supplement is a good place to start. And again, I think 15 milligrams a day is recommended, but always check the labels with supplements. Always do your research, because there is too much of a good thing, and there are quite often upper limits on supplements. And for zinc, that's about 40 milligrams a day. So it's not a case of just piling in your supplement tablets, just to make sure. We just need to be a little bit careful that we're not going too far beyond that spectrum. Vitamin B12 is another one. So I think if there are any kind of vegetarians who've been at it for a while, vegans who've been at it for a while, they'll be aware things like Marmite, maybe sauerkraut are good plant-based sources. Those are probably the only naturally occurring ones for B12. They do fortify it in breakfast cereals, things like that. Typically on a non-plant-based diet, that's going to come from meat, poultry, eggs and dairy. So you see there's a little bit of a theme here that there is a difference. Again, you would probably need to have a reasonable amount of fortified plant milk to get enough B12. But one of the simplest things a vegan can do with B12 is it's a water-soluble vitamin, which means it doesn't actually matter too much how much of it you have, because you'll simply excrete it out through going through a wee. But you've got to be careful. So you can easily supplement with B12 because it doesn't matter, you can't over-consume it. That's why they can fortify cereals and things with it, because they don't need to control how much you eat. But just be careful with the other vitamins you're taking, that you're not getting too much of them. Again, the detail of that is in my blog, so you don't need to be taking notes and things, just awareness. Omega-3 fats, so we might have heard of those terms. Typically they're going to come naturally from oily fish, things like salmon. If we're eating, because we're a pescatarian, if we're eating a couple of portions of oily fish a week, that's really good. That's probably going to be sufficient. I probably have one portion a week, so I take a little supplement, which is fine, because I've identified that gap and said, I'm not going to do that every week, so I'm going to take a little supplement. There are recently some really good plant-based omega-3 supplements, because mostly they come from fish oil. The thing to be careful with the vegan supplements for omega-3 is sometimes they're made out of, they've got a lot of getting sciencey alpha-linoleic acid, which is harder to break down for our body, and it has to actually convert it into different forms of fatty acid. But the better vegetarian ones to go for are the ones that are algae-based, and they do exist now with a lot of supplements. Sometimes, not always, sometimes the more expensive ones are going to be much, much better for you. It's a little bit about doing your research. Sometimes the more expensive ones are just branded and marketed, so that's why they're expensive. But I guess an algae-based supplement is going to be more expensive, but it's actually going to supplement properly rather than relying on a cheaper version of that, I think is the take-home point there. Now, I guess everyone's probably, if anyone's a vegetarian or vegan, a more plant-based diet, a big bugbear, they probably get asked all the time, and it's why I've left it towards the end, where do you get your protein from? Your grandma's probably, where's your protein coming from, dearie? All that stuff. So, in the UK, if we were to just eat any old diet, we would probably get enough protein for, I'll call it clinical sufficiency, so for nothing bad to happen to you medically. I'm all about helping you guys thrive, so there's a big difference between what the NHS might say is the minimum amount, that it's not going to harm you, and a higher amount of protein that's going to help you stay feeling fuller for longer, help your muscles repair if you're active and exercise, help all of your cells repair because it's not just muscles, it's skin, hair, bones, teeth. So important for all of your functions. It's important for making the hormones within our body. It's literally the building blocks of life. Clearly, protein is muscle if it comes from an animal. That's where we're getting that from. And animal sources of protein have all of the building blocks in place. It's a complete source. It's got all of the amino acids for those building blocks. So if you're a flexitarian and you eat a little bit of meat, you're probably getting a sufficient profile of proteins. That doesn't mean that you can't do that by having a fully plant-based diet. What it does mean is that we should probably be mixing up our protein sources across the course of a week for all of the nice protein sources that we're eating. So that's, say, having tofu some days, then we might have chickpeas another day. If we are really into sports performance, we can think about that a little bit more in detail, but I just wonder in the audience, have we got any kind of, I know Ruth is in the fitness business, but has anyone else kind of sporty, athletic sort of aspirations, or are you just, yeah, so a couple of you. So depending on how active you are, for what I would term an athlete or a weekend warrior or a gym goer, it might be difficult for you to get enough protein in your diet to support a high activity level without taking a supplement. But there are some great plant-based supplements out there. The ones that are made from rice and peas are going to give you a nice blended profile, because it's all about mixing and matching our proteins. One of the real classics is to have like beans on toast, gets you the full spectrum of proteins. And a lot of things that we naturally put together, culturally, we've evolved to actually realise subconsciously that those are all the stuff that, because they go well together, they also support our function. Again, I talk about that in a little bit more detail on the blog, but there's not a lot of people that are in, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole of sports performance and bore you all. But feel free to ask me afterwards, because we could be here for hours. Final 2 points. So I want to talk about calories. Calories matter for health in general. A lot of people associate that with weight loss and things and calorie-controlled diets and all that stuff. But if we're quite active, you guys, we need to make sure we're getting enough fuel in the tank, because we need to support that. Our body does really well on not a lot, and it can actually cope on a low-calorie diet. But that can really harm us in the long run, because we're just not performing to our maximum capacity. So what happens quite often on a fully plant-based diet, all the foods are minimally processed, which is great. They're quite hard to overeat, which can be good. They take a long time to eat, so we naturally slow down the way we eat. We eat a high volume of stuff, but we don't get much energy out of it if we're not careful. And that's where I'll come on to fats in a plant-based diet, because fats have been probably a hangover from the 80s really, but demonized for a long time, low fat this, low fat that, no taste, whatever. The World Health Organization actually say you should have 20 to 30% of your calories from fats in your diet. On an animal, where we eat a lot of animal protein, there's a lot of fat that comes associated with that isn't bad for our health. But if we take that away, we then just need to be a bit careful about where we're getting those sources from. So if I were to look along the top row there, lots of carby, pulsy things, which are all great, high in fibre, really nutritious, not a lot of fat content. So then I might look down a bit lower and say, am I getting a few different nuts in my diet? We could talk about stuff like oils as well. We've got the lovely olive oil we've got here. So that's another important component to not miss out on when we're kind of building a rounded plate of food, and not to be fearful of, because a lot of the plant-based sources of fat aren't obvious and we probably wouldn't eat a lot of them. And so I guess I'll just wrap up the technical bit of the talk, if you like, with just a really simplest way of thinking about building a balanced plate of food. I would always start with identifying a protein source, so that might be some tofu or some chickpeas. Something like a chickpea is actually half and half protein and carbohydrates. People can get a bit complex about that, but just pick one. It can be a carbohydrate, it can be a protein source. So I might say I'm going to have some chickpeas, that's my protein source. 1 or 2 palm-sized portions of protein when it's cooked on your plate, depending how big you are, how active you are. We'll add some carbohydrates, so we might pick some rice, which again is also a source of protein, so it doesn't really matter which one. I'm going to do the same, 1 or 2 palm-sized portions of rice. Then I'm going to think about where I'm going to get my fat from. So I've got chickpeas, I've got rice, so I might make a little tomato-based curry out of that. Maybe I need to add some coconut oil, or maybe I can sprinkle on some nuts. But I'm going to think about that portion as being a lot smaller, and that's going to be something like the size of my thumb. Again, 1 or 2 thumbs, depending on how active, hungry, big you are. Does that kind of make sense? Have I wrapped up with that little bit of guidance? Okay, so that's a whistle-stop tour of basically the blog I've written all about it. Does that help? How did you find that? Has anybody picked up anything they think they might have identified a little gap? Is anybody confused?
I think I really like the idea of being able to measure it in like your hand. Also, if you're a bigger person, obviously you have a bigger hand, so that like
Exactly, yeah, scales to the size of you.
Yeah.
And it scales to your natural size. So, and if you do like calorie counting, it will kind of you build it on what weight you are. But actually, it's a much simpler method because if you're naturally bigger, it just scales to your size naturally, and it's just you can take it anywhere with you. So I quite like that as a basic introduction.
Does that work for children as well? Children and smaller, do you still use?
The principles work for children, yeah. I would say with a child, they're quite often, depending how old they are, they've got small tummies, so they need to eat more often because they will, I mean, with some skin in the game experience with that, but they have small tummies, they need to eat more often. But the basic principles of building a healthy meal still apply the same to a child. Plenty of fruits and vegetables, source of protein, fats, all that good stuff, not too much salt, depending on how old they are.
Does the app work for children? Do they change
I
the
would say
amount?
no. So children will have a different requirement. I don't know whether they've set it up in the app or if indeed they're allowed to. NHS website has got basically got everything that you need to know on there and the national recommendations. So depending on how old they are, there will be targets. I don't know what those are off the top of my head, I'm afraid, but I can find them out. But they will all be listed on the NHS website.
I think my biggest issue is how when you eat stuff like you were saying about adding lines of spinach, like how you absorb it and how much you're actually getting from the actual plant. Like if organic obviously is naturally better, and knowing what's got pesticides and having that kind of what's added into that kind of thing. So you're buying it off the shelf, but actually what's gone into that, or where's that vegetable kind of come from? So.
That is interesting. It can matter as well. How far away the vegetables come from, how old it is. If it's just out of the ground from the garden, it's probably going to have more of the nutrients intact because it's not started to degrade. Though in terms of vegetables, like frozen food is really good because in terms of nutrition, because it's frozen at source, so it's all locked in straight away. But as you say, getting enough vitamins is fine, but you've also got to absorb them, and it helps to absorb all your vitamins if you're having that bit of fat with your meals, because that allows all of the vitamins that are fat soluble to be absorbed.
Do you recommend like a type of like rapeseed oil or olive oil or?
No, I think plant-based oils, if you're adding oil to a meal, plant-based oils tend to be the better ones from a health perspective to add. If you eat meat, then that's already taken care of by. The more processed something is, the more kind of red flags are there. But if you're adding stuff in olive oil, rapeseed oil, and rapeseed oil is grown in the UK, isn't it? So that's probably a bit more of a sustainable one. Although I know Nini's olive oil is actually quite local.
It's from Greece.
Greece.
But it's sustainably sort of harvested and produced. Yeah, so we can't grow olives in the UK yet.
Yeah, exactly.
But maybe one day soon. Yeah.
I kind of steer clear of that. A couple of other plant-based fat sources, avocados and olives. Like there's a sustainability picture about that, as I'm sure you can appreciate. But those are good sources from a nutrition standpoint.
Yeah, I was wondering about the rapeseed oil because the one that we have is cold pressed. So what's the difference? Do you know?
So, yeah, put me on the spot.
Sorry.
Cold pressing doesn't damage it as much. So sometimes if you're cooking and you take the oil past its technical term flash point, that will cause some damage. But then those compounds that it makes aren't brilliant for you. Now, if you're doing that now and then, if you're having a barbecue and it's a bit charred, like that's fine. It's only going to be bad for you if you're doing it day in, day out, every single day.
Yeah.
But yes, cold pressed I think is. But then because I think the cold pressed oils don't have the higher cooking temperature. I think that's why you cook with olive oil. You dress with extra virgin olive oil.
Yeah,
Is
that's
that
what I was
correct?
trying
I
to
think
get with the whole,
that's
and rapeseed and stuff is better to cook. You can get a higher temperature and it doesn't.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Might have muddled that around slightly, but I think that's it's a Jamie Oliver tip. I think I watched him talking about that. Has anyone got an experience they'd like to share about their own kind of diet? Has anyone transitioned recently to a more plant-based diet and found that good, bad, indifferent?
I've actually been doing all those boxes, Green Chef.
Okay.
So actually, yeah, I have, and I've really enjoyed it. Just changing to things like maybe have 3 days a week where I'm not eating meat
Yeah.
and eating things like tofu or whatever. I've never really done that before.
Have you found it's almost presented you with a little plan of action
Yeah.
to like try some different
it's
things?
been a
and
good way to
inspiration?
get me to do it.
Yeah, I find a lot of my clients find those kind of boxes quite helpful because
Yeah,
it kind of
and
does a
I'm
bit
not
up.
going to carry on for months doing it, but it was a good start to get me on the.
Yeah, you get the opportunity to
path.
learn from it as
Yeah.
well. Yeah, I like that.
It's called Green Chef. It was really good actually.
I tried a diet that I've since been told isn't very good for me. I tried the Paleo Diet a few years ago now. But I think I quickly realised, I really enjoyed getting on top of trying to have to really work hard to think about what I was buying in the supermarket rather than just eating carbs all the time, but being really active. So I was measuring my weight every day just to keep on top of it. It's basically it's zero carb and very low carb.
Yeah, so the kind of foundation of that was basically to summarise that: eat like a caveman, like just like minimally processed foods. But as simple rules are quite handy for the human brain. So it's like, as you say, like no junk, not too many very few carbs, because it's all supposed to be, strictly speaking, like tubers and stuff that's grown in the ground.
Yeah.
That works for a while, but it's a bit restrictive, as you found out. If you're quite active, it's actually okay to eat a bit of cake and a bit of
that's what I
the
said.
other stuff.
Anytime I did some physical exercise, I was just allowed to eat the carbs because otherwise I just couldn't maintain weight.
Yeah, and you're quite slightly built anyway, so I imagine you probably need a lot of energy in your system when you're exercising. Yeah. But yeah, nothing's ever necessarily good or bad. I think sometimes we're a bit too black and white with it, but sometimes we do need those parameters of cut out all of this and you'll make some success. But actually, when you dig into the detail, it's cutting out all of the obvious stuff that you probably would think of anyway, like full fat Coke and Burger King and all the stuff that we kind of realise probably isn't great for us.
Yeah. How healthy are things like Huel? Nutritionally
Again, I was saying a little bit earlier, fundamentally your body will process everything in the same way.
Yeah.
You'll get away with that to a massive extent when you're quite active as well. I don't think there's a lot of extra stuff in Huel. It's a vegan protein blend. I think they use a rice and pea blend. There's not too many additives, but then you can go too far with the additives. There's additives in lots of things, and some of those are beneficial to us, like fortified things. So I think Huel is okay, and if it makes your life easier, great, go for it. Eating a meal that I described out the hand portion guidance I talked about is going to do exactly the same job, but it might not be as convenient, and that's where things like that come in.
I have a gym question.
Yeah, go for it, yeah.
I was thinking, like, when I go to the gym, I'm highly anemic.
Right.
So that's just how I am. It's
Yeah.
not just diet thing.
Mm-hmm.
So when I go to the gym, I get tired quite quickly, and I can only do shorter workouts each day.
Okay.
So I wondered if there was a certain thing I could focus on eating before, sort of pre-gym snack to sort of.
What do you eat now?
I'm a flexitarian, so I have to eat a lot of red meat because I just fall down otherwise. So I eat red meat a good amount of chickpeas a lot, and lentils and spinach, all that kind of thing. But before the gym, like I just want to make my workout more effective. But I always find that I have to do sort of 45 minutes and then stop rather than being able to do it longer.
I think for a start, 45 minutes, if that's what you can do, go at it for 45 minutes. That's okay. It doesn't have to be an hour. How well are you hydrated? Would you say?
I'll probably do better with water. But,
the other thing is, actually in my bottle I've got some electrolyte, which is sodium, potassium, bit of a sports drink, but that wouldn't do any harm because the sodium, potassium hydrates you properly versus water. You need the salts, you need the sodium, potassium to hydrate you completely. Might be worth trying a little bit of that because that can sometimes be where the energy drain comes from. I assume you said you're highly anemic. You've probably been to the doctor. You've been through all that.
oh yeah. I've been anemic since I was 14.
Iron tablets and all that stuff. So that's
most of the
covered.
time.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're doing all the right things. Maybe play around a little bit with the hydration and see if that helps.
Great, thank you.
I think that's the thing that frustrates me the most with like people wanting to move to more plant-based and things. It's just having that kind of knowing that balance of what and how much to consume, like you just mentioned, which is really handy.
Yeah.
But also that kind of what your body does absorb better, and like when you combine that kind of combination of foods and how that kind of absorbs to get the maximum exposure to those foods. And I feel like there's still so much to do on that kind of research and generally like as a society and as a world.
Yeah, and I think it's about kind of making it a bit more accessible to people and simple. So I think I do some recipes and things for like different ways to cook the food, give you the nutrition profile of what's out here. I think one of the best philosophies you can kind of stick to is variety. If you eat a variety of everything in your diet, regardless of your setup, you're going to give yourself the best possible chance of sufficiency in all the minerals. I talk about like eating the rainbow, but just like eat different things across the course of the week. Like lots of us have busy lives and it's not always possible, so I'm not saying you have to eat a different ingredient at every single meal, but over the course of a week and a month, like just make sure you're mixing it up and just giving yourself the best possible chance to get all those things in.
And you were mentioning pressure cookers before as well. You mentioned pressure
I haven't, no. So one of the things we're talking about in here, so obviously lots of dry goods, lots of pulses and things. Like I had a bit of a light bulb moment of you have to soak a lot of the pulses to cook them traditionally, which you need to then plan to do it. Whereas with a pressure cooker, you can do them on demand, and that might take like 20 minutes versus an overnight soak. And when you pressure cook something, you lock everything into that container, you lock in all the energy, so you're using less energy to heat it, but you also lock in all the nutrients that are normally escaping through the steam and just go back into the pressure cooker. So that's one thing we're going to put together a bit of guidance on how to maybe do that.
And they don't look like how your granny used to make your marmalade anymore.
They've redesigned them.
They have.
Yeah, they're a lot safer than they used to be. They've got proper pressure safety valves and so they're not going to blow up on you. And it's a big lump of steel, so it's made once. You might need to change a gasket every 5 to 10 years, but it's quite a it's a once and done investment really. And
We
not
quite
very
often
expensive.
batch cook using a pressure cooker, don't we?
Yeah, we do. Yeah. I find it really handy kitchen. It's big, so you have to have a big enough cupboard, but after that it's
I mean,
quite
personally, I hate using a slow cooker because you can just smell the dinner all day and it just makes you hungry. So I much prefer cooking in the pressure cooker.
Keeps it all contained.
Keeps it all contained, and you do it. You're preparing it at dinner time rather than smelling it all day.
So have some of these recipes be ready then for my pressure cooker I'm going to go and get.
Yeah.
well.
Pressure's on.
Pressure's on. Well, we've got some of them already, so hopefully this side of Christmas. We can certainly get the information out on how to use the ingredients in that, and then we'll start to come.
Yeah, so we're going to have barcodes on on everything that you can just scan, and it takes you to a page on our website where you get all how to cook it, the nutritional value, and all of that. Yeah, so we're working on it with Tim. Yeah.
And we'll set it up quite simply, so there'll be like a headline of this is a source of protein, high in fibre, low GI carbohydrate, like just, and then we'll tell you what all those terms mean on the website, so you can actually understand them.
Yeah. So would you say that there are certain ways of preparing things that retain the nutritional content more? Like, is roasting worse than boiling, or do you lose a lot of the nutrients when you cook things?
I think, I guess the more you cook something, the more of the nutrients will escape, because you're kind of breaking it down and things like the more you cook a vegetable, it gets mushier and mushier and mushier. So yeah, the more you do something to the food, the more it kind of, the nutrition dials down. But then you can't eat a piece of raw meat without getting sick. So there's a balance between cooking. But so if you want to get all the nutrients from your carrot, then eating it raw is better. But you might find it more tasty to cook it, and then you eat more of it. And then if you put some butter on that, you're going to absorb the vitamins from the carrot better than eating it alone. So yeah, it does depend. But fundamentally, the more you cook something, the more nutrients will escape from it, or the older it is. So I think I talked briefly about like the carrot from your garden versus the carrot from Sainsbury's is probably going to be more nutritious because it hasn't been out of the ground for as long.
So when things age, they sort of lose that nutritional content.
Yeah.
Is it a significant difference?
Yeah, I'm not saying everyone needs to go out and make massive allotment it's not
No,
going to
they
be a
do.
detriment to your health.
With soil as well, because that's got a lot of depletion at the moment. Is there anything that you can kind of do about that, or not really? Like, obviously, I think there's like a stamp soil association.
There is, soil association is I don't know a lot. I do know of the soil association. I think that's the place to go to get the information on
what's happening
on the systems in place to kind of ensure that doesn't happen. I know like lots of the farmers that aren't associated with the supermarkets or are mass producing food for them are being really smart about it. They know a lot about sustainability. There's probably a lot of information on the NFU, National Farmers Union website, just about their farming practices. Now they're going to be more holistic, and they're going to be wanting to rotate their crop fields to say, I'm going to graze my cattle on the grass because that puts back some of the nutrients in the soil, and I need to use less or no fertiliser. So it's quite a complex picture, but I would say the Soil Association got some good stuff, and National Farmers Union, because that's part of their job. And sometimes, like, even if you're not in support of farming animals for food, like, it's sometimes beneficial to see to have your opinion challenged, to have your viewpoint challenged by someone with a different viewpoint. Sometimes, just to see whether there's something you can take away from that. I'm not saying that you were challenging that, but just sometimes it's interesting to see both sides of the fence.
I'm interested in, you can get like vegan butter and vegan like margarines and things like that. Like, how do you think those are healthy, or because I guess it's quite highly processed, so maybe oil is a better source for that.
I was watching; they were using it on the Bake Off the other week, weren't they? I can't remember what they make it out of. It comes down to what the core ingredient is, and I think butter is processed. You churn it; it's not direct out of the cow, but it still has a nutritional value. I think processing isn't always bad if it gets it in a form that we can eat. I don't know exactly what they make them out of, so I'm hard pressed to say. Soya is one that people talk about a lot, and there's been a bit of perhaps scaremongering about too much soya in the diet. You have got to eat so much soya for it to have a detriment. It's probably not a problem for any person in this room. There was a study where men were getting female features from the estrogen level, but the study was in bodybuilders, professional bodybuilders who were training 5 times a day and eating more just predominant solely soya protein in volumes that none of us would eat. So it's just not going to happen to the average person. But sometimes people do get a bit worried about that soya thing, but the only potential thing is if it upsets your tummy. It does for some people. But as with anything, if something upsets you, probably not good to eat. for you personally.
But obviously there's the sustainability question about soya as well, isn't there?
Yeah, I don't, is it grown in the UK as well though?
I'm not sure. Yeah, you can actually.
Yeah.
Also in the UK. I think the issues with monocultures of soya, which are
Right.
problematic because it wipes out biodiversity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But,
Isn't most of that soya is used to feed livestock a lot though?
Yeah, so that's-
most
yeah,
monocultures
that's-
come from
Yeah.
feeding the livestock rather than feeding humans, I believe.
Yeah.
I
I think that's a very good point as well. So some of the more localised farmers who are kind of trying to get back to basics are growing their own
definitely.
feedstock to feed their animals rather than
And they've
importing
got
it
more
from.
diverse diet, which is better for the
Yeah, it makes
the
better
food
meat.
that you eat.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's a good point.
Ruth and I were talking about vegan cheese earlier.
Oh yeah.
And would you have any recommendations?
I've not tried it. No. There probably are some good ones out there though. I think
Vegan cheese.
Sophie's vegan cheese.
Yeah.
Do you recommend?
She'll be at the
market on Sunday.
market on
Oh, really?
Sunday.
Oh, okay. Oh yeah, down. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's actually a whole vegan market, so you can get like plant-based burgers and
Okay.
loads of like massive variety of like hot food, vegan dishes and things like that, like sushi rolls, which are amazing. Yeah, loads of stuff.
yeah, it's a really good market. It's amazing. You can just get anything vegan these days.
Yeah.
It's like with the cakes we have, it's like, really? This is vegan? But yeah,
Yeah.
you can do everything without animal products. But yeah, no, the vegan cheese, you can make your own quite easily, I think, as well. You just like soak cashew nuts, for example,
Yeah.
and blend it and like add
Okay.
different spices and herbs to give it that flavour. And nutritional yeast is quite a good thing to add to give that cheesy texture, flavour, well not texture, but yeah, the flavour.
Yeah, because I think actually Marmite is nutritional yeast. It's that I think it's
Yeah, it
close
is.
to that. So that's
we see
yeah.
that like from
Be
the
helpful.
taste as well. I don't know.
Sesame seeds.
Is it sesame seeds? Okay.
We've been cooking with the Bosch books. We got given them 2 years ago by some friends for our wedding, and they're so good for variety.
Yeah.
They use lots of different ingredients. They do take a bit longer to cook, but then you can make them in like batch cook for the rest of the week. They actually have a recipe for vegan cheese as well, so it's a vegan cookbook.
Yeah.
But they use really fresh vegetable, fruit and veg, and a whole range of things, like you're saying, mixing like
Yeah.
your carbohydrates with your proteins, and because they use that combination of ingredients.
Yeah, I've got I've got a 15-minute vegan cookbook. I think it's called 15-minute vegan. That's a really good one for people who are busy and still want to do that kind of thing. It's like really good like lentil bolognese, for want of a better term, but the lentil ragu tastes really good. I think we'll probably do that as one of the recipes here, the form of that.
Even that tray bake recipe book that we've got is just so easy because it just basically lists out all of the different carbohydrates, your proteins, and you basically just pick one just to kind of like create your tray bake, which is good, isn't it?
Yeah, and generally for busy people who are into health as well, like if you can have a load of different options in the fridge ready to go of those different sources of stuff, you don't need to do all the meal prep and stacking up your Tupperwares and all that. You just kind of open the fridge and go, right, one of those. That's my lunch done. And that bit of forward planning makes your life a lot easier. And that bit of forward planning using your freezer means your food waste goes down, which is another big element to everything.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether you want to talk about our Monday to Sunday
Yeah, so
list
like,
that we have.
again, in terms of like meal planning, like get my clients to do that because they want to be organised and they want to make the changes they need to work for them. But our meal planning at home is a little whiteboard with a marker pen by the side of the fridge, and we just put the main protein content of each meal, and then we just make sure we get that out of the freezer every day, or have that ready. So it just makes our life really simple. So when it comes to the evening, it's like, right, we know we're eating that, we just put what we fancy together with that. But you've kind of made that decision when you've got a quiet moment, rather than when you finish work, you're really busy, or kids are kicking off, or whatever, you can kind of
Hungry,
or when you're hungry, yeah, which is the worst time to make a decision.
But we definitely have less food waste because when it comes to a Sainsbury's shop, we're like, right, we're having that for dinner, we need those ingredients. Yeah.
we're not like impulse buying stuff that then doesn't get used.
The biggest frustration though with like plant-based stuff that you can buy, like the products on the shelf at the moment, which are great that people kind of know we've got more of it, the packaging and everything that comes with it. It's just, and you can't even recycle half of it, so it's just all.
Yeah,
it's just,
that's
like, really
the thing about
frustrating.
plant-based stuff. It just tends to be a
So
lot
they've
of
got half of
plastic
it right,
packaging.
but then they need to get the other half.
Yeah. Actually, we were looking today because we've got soybeans in here. We're like, what can we make with these? Oh, and we were looking up a recipe to make your own tofu.
Yeah.
It's actually really easy.
Yeah, I think it is actually. Yeah.
I can't remember exactly. It's just like soybeans and lemon juice
and water, and
Yeah.
then put it through one of the like nut bags.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
The nut sacks. So yeah, you just like filter it through there, right? And then you keep the pulp that's left, and that's what is the tofu.
It's tofu,
Yeah. So make your own. It's a good way to not have lots of packaging as well, if you've got the time. But it's fun to be a bit creative sometimes, learn new things.
Yeah.
Same with plant milk. You can easily make your own out of oats or almonds. Yeah, it's quite a simple process if you've got the right equipment, which is basically just a blender and one of those like filtering bags. Yeah.
I've got a new machine that I'm obsessed with for plant milk. It's called Milk Moo or something like that.
Right.
But it's got the filter machine in the jug, so you literally just pour the nuts in, press start, and it does everything, and then you just pour it into like a jug and put it in your fridge.
Yeah, it's amazing when you start making it yourself. You realize like for maybe 500 milliliters of milk, almond milk, you only need like 10 almonds.
Yeah.
And water, yeah. So it makes you realize like we're buying this stuff and paying so much for basically water.
Yeah.
So I guess where you are making your own plant-based milks, that's where to think about, am I still getting enough calcium B12, and if you're not, maybe a supplement is a good idea because you're doing that for the right thing, but I don't want you compromising yourselves by missing out on all that goodness that you need long-term, I think.
Yeah. Like the oat milk that we have is fortified in calcium.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that it is an appropriate like alternative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I need to speak to them about the B12. I wonder if they put that in, but if they haven't, again, that's quite easily, as I said, like for a vegan, just taking a supplement is probably just going to be the easiest thing to do because you know you're covered. It's not going to have a detriment to you.
You've been talking about like taking supplements. Obviously, there's a limit to just like taking a load of pills.
Yeah.
What would you say would be the limit? Where would you sort of cap it at?
Depends on the particular supplement. So Chronometer will tell you what they all are because it will say like you'll tell it that you're a female, you're a certain age, and it will give you the recommended daily allowances. All of the supplement bottles should tell you the RDA on them. It shouldn't be anything over 100% if it's not one that you can take more than 100% of. So, and the NHS website is a good source if you just want to check a particular one, just to make sure you're not getting too much or too little. You only need to do it once, then you know. It's like, I don't know all the numbers off the top of my head. I would say for an active person, I take a full spectrum multivitamin just as a bit of an insurance policy, like, just to make sure I'm filling the gaps that I don't necessarily fill every day. And that's because if you're very active, you're burning through a lot more of those micronutrients. So you probably, if you want to thrive, it's probably good to have a few more of them in your diet. But if you're having a massive variety of plants in your diet, you're probably getting enough stuff, bar things I've mentioned in the talk.
Okay, so do you use them as supplements, like just the odd?
Yeah, I specifically just have like one or two things. So I've done that gap analysis, if I call it that, I've looked at chronometer as well. I don't eat much of that, I'm just going to put a supplement there.
What would the most obvious symptoms be of lacking certain nutrients?
Quite often it's going to be tiredness. Unfortunately, some of them are a bit more long-term symptoms. So I think B12 deficiency can lead to spinal cord degradation, which is going to take a while to kick in, and then it's going to be a bit too late. So that's why it's important to just like think about it. What were they? Tiredness can come from a lot of things, so to make sure you're eating a very helpful, sort of filling diet. We talked about iron deficiency, anemia is tiredness, shortness of breath, maybe pale skin. I think low energy is a red flag, but it could be a few different things. I think. Yeah, I don't think I've skipped anything else out.
you might not know this, but is that true, that thing about if you see white spots on your nails, that means you're lacking in certain things?
Yeah, I've never fact checked
This is
that.
like very anecdotal now.
Yeah, I've never fact checked that.
Oh, no,
I'm just checking to see if I've got any.
No, I just noticed that I do.
I got told that it was hereditary, that it's not a reflection.
Really?
Of,
I think it's one of those things that you used to get told at school,
I
isn't it,
know,
or something, but
yeah.
Yeah, that it's not a reflection, and the
Not,
only
yeah,
thing
not something I'm aware of. It's never come up in my
Okay.
training, so
So
I don't
not
think
got
it's a
any, like,
big thing.
scientific
If it is, yeah,
basis
I'd
that
have
you
to
know
check
of.
it out. But
Yeah, fact check that. Oh, but it's hereditary.
Yeah, and the only thing that you want to really be careful of is that you're not getting like deep, like lines going
Grooves,
along,
yeah.
like grooves,
Okay.
because that's when your nail can start cracking.
Yeah.
But otherwise, it's apparently nothing to worry about. Because I had a
Okay.
similar thing.
Yeah, good to know.
Do you have anywhere to recommend to look for vegetarian recipes? Because I'm afraid my family are much more like you. Trying to get them off meat really is hard. So
my go-to is always the BBC Good Food website because they've got loads of stuff on there. It's called the nutrition information. They have a whole section on vegetarian, vegan recipes that are all relatively healthy, quick and easy to do. Jamie Oliver's got good books. Yeah, and again on his website we'll have a few. And I guess if you were to, I guess one way to do that is to go for something like the family are having a chicken curry. Half the chicken and fill it with chickpeas.
yeah.
It's going to be loads more filling, it's going to be cheaper. And yeah, you're right, quite a lot of the supermarket ready meals are going that way. They're kind of.
But even the adverts and that, they're trying to push to take some of the meat out and put something else.
So because sometimes it's going to be a big step for people, right? So I guess this part of this is all about making it accessible to people, whatever level they might be, and we're all at different places in this room. So I guess with my nutrition coach hat on, I would never take anything away from any of my clients. I just suggest adding stuff that I know is going to be more nutritious. And if you start putting chickpeas in there, they'll probably need less of the curry, you'll have leftovers, like it's all going to kind of slowly click into place without kind of tearing up their lifestyle from
Things like bolognese as well, just like, don't even tell them you're not using meat, just use the corn, and I've done that on several occasions for like friends, and they're like, they actually said it was like the best they had, and then I told them meat free, and they were like, oh, so yes, I think sometimes just like, not letting them know the first time just cooking something they normally have, but do it in an alternative way helps.
We did a similar thing. We fed our friends and family minced mushrooms. So you put them in a blender, mince them up, and then you fry them and add all your herbs and spices. And we had, I think it was your uncle, come up to us at the end and be like, that was such amazing chili. And he's like a real meat eater. And we were like, that was vegan. And he was like, really?
Amazing.
Like, you just couldn't tell the texture. Like, yeah, amazing. No idea.
again with my nutrition coach hat on, make it tasty.
So,
So
this
like,
is from the Bosch books. They used a ton of spices and herbs.
Spices and herbs.
Yeah.
Like salt gets a lot of bad rap. It is essential to have salt in our diets. I've already talked about electrolytes. It is essential to maintain our blood pressure, if anything else. But if we cook all of our own food, it's okay to put salt in it. It's the added salt, the over the top added salt. I mean, chefs get a lot of rap on the TV for like seasoning stuff heavily, but that's okay because it's fresh. It's got no other salt in it. It's when you buy like a Big Mac and chips and then you put salt on the chips they've already salted. That's the salt we're worried about. It's not the stuff we're adding ourselves to make it taste good.
And on the cookbook thing, someone who came in here recommended Hugh Fearnley-Whittingall does a veg book as well. It's supposed to be really good.
Imagine he's quite good on that as well.
Yeah, because he used to be a big advocate for meat eating as well, but he's totally sort of transitioned and changed as well along his personal journey. So apparently his latest book on veg.
I think he did a series on him transitioning on TV.
Maybe, yeah.
Made that up. But he's got a quite farming background as well, so he kind of understands the nuts and bolts of making it work with agriculture, I think.
That's it. So that might be a good one to look into.
I was wondering, what makes a meal keep you full for a long time except for getting all the nutrients you need? Like, how do you not go hungry after a while?
So, fibre, which you'll get quite a lot of from a plant-based diet anyway, and protein. I know some of my clients I've worked with who like transitioned to a vegan diet, always snacking, they just hadn't got the protein quite right. So just the introduction of like some more chickpeas, which are like protein and fibre, or a bit of tofu and things, and just like, again, just spotting the gaps. Am I getting a protein source with that? Like protein, fibre, vegetables are all going to be really filling. And if you've got a big plate of vegetables, that's okay. There's not a lot of calories there. So just because a meal is big, volume-wise, doesn't mean it's got lots of calories in, especially if it's all veggies. So don't be afraid of filling up your stomach, because as soon as your stomach gets full, that switches the satiety, that flicks the satiety switch in your head and says, I'm full now. Whereas if you're just eating like a small amount, you're always going to be hungry, regardless of how many calories are in it.
What do you think about eating a lot of fruit? Because that can be high in sugar, right?
It can be. I think that's another thing that has been taken too far. Fruit is really healthful, full of fibre, vitamins, minerals. I guess a dentist might say to you, don't eat too much, but I think in terms of like, if we're eating 15 bananas a day, like that's kind of like going to be, A, who's doing that, but it should be a red flag.
There's a diet.
There is a diet. Yeah, I think there's like one of the Australian cricketers used to do it, and
Yeah,
I'm sure because he was vegan, I think they were just trying to get the energy in him for his training and his performance, but
It's not sustainable.
yeah. So I think normally you kind of rule of thumb, a couple of portions a day, because it's just got a few more calories in it. But if you're just eating quite a heavily plant-based diet and there's not a lot of calories in it, and you're hungry, have an extra piece of fruit, especially if you're like sporty and active, it's going to be fine. All of that sugar gets broken down into glucose in your body, so your body uses it in exactly the same way. Sugar is possibly, in terms of like obesity and health, is dangerous added sugars, because we just eat loads of it. No one's eating really, they're not gorging on 10, 15 apples in a sitting. Like you're probably going through like a bag of chocolate quite quickly, so a similar amount of calories, because it's easy to eat, and that's where the sugars, added sugars, are a problem. Too much fibre is going to upset your tummy a little bit, so that's another reason not to eat loads of fruit, because it's quite high in fibre. But if we're just introducing more fruits and vegetables to our diet, just do it slowly, because our stomachs and our digestive system need to catch up with that.
Is there anything you need to be careful with young children who are trying to, so in my family we are omnivores, but we eat less meat now, eat more, a bit more plant-based foods, but young children, obviously, do you just have to be careful that you're making sure they're getting enough calcium and balance of fat and sugar, or they've got different requirements that you need to be a bit more aware of?
Broadly speaking, the requirements are the same. I talked a little bit earlier about like they need to eat more often, because their tummies are smaller. They'll get full quite quickly because their tummies are small, and I just wonder, like anecdotally, more high fibre stuff is going to fill them up. So I just like be mindful that they're still getting enough of the good stuff. Not being afraid of them having the odd bit of chocolate or something within parameters of, you know, like I was, as a kid, I did just eat chocolate for every meal, but like not being afraid of that, especially if they're eating plenty of vegetables, they're going to thrive, they're going to maintain their weight really easily because they're just so active and running around all the time. So I just being aware that if their food is too filling, they might not be eating quite enough. But like they'll always be hungry at a certain age. They're just always active. Quite often people will say, oh, like that. One of my course lecturers was a dietitian, said that people always tell her kids are too skinny. And she's like, no, I just feed them lots of fruits and vegetables, and that is the size they are. They're supposed to be that size at that age. So I don't let them have too much of the other stuff that makes them a bit podgy. So I think, there's nothing particularly outside of probably what you already know as a mum to be concerned about.
Any tips for family friendly?
Family friendly.
There's always a challenge of thinking what you might want to do. But then is everyone else going to eat it? And it's like really interesting and hearing and lots of good ideas and stuff. But then you've got to actually make that work at home.
So what works well for you first and foremost? A meal?
do have some meat, obviously, not vegan or anything, but I want to have more vegetarian meals a week.
Mm-hmm.
Have one child who's very against that,
Yeah.
one who's quite happy with it, and my husband's kind of sort of happy to improve our diet that way. So we go a bit to it. It's just I don't know. He was like, starting with what's really healthy, and then trying to then compromise on some things to not try and force things on children.
How old are they?
6 and 8.
6 and 8.
Yeah.
Okay. Do they help you with the cooking?
No, not really.
Would that be chaos if they did? Or?
Yeah, probably. They're not still long enough for me to.
Right.
But yeah, I could get them more involved.
Because sometimes when they help out with the cooking, even if it's just like scrubbing the veg, they start to like get that little bit buy. And sometimes they if you're growing some of it in the garden as well, they get super excited about that. And like I've heard lots of parents say, like my kid doesn't even like tomatoes, but we've grown our own and now they're obsessed with them because they come out with like those funny little bits of psychology.
Having more of a relationship with it rather than just you go.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I quite often like child nutrition, like they taught me that they are sometimes a bit cleverer and more independent than you sometimes give them credit for. So if you give them that extra layer of responsibility, sometimes they run with that and they get really excited about it. So that might help.
Start with something sweet, like chocolate and courgette muffins are really good as a way of getting like courgette and vegetable into something that they probably associate as being good. So if you made that and they liked it, and then you say, oh, come and make it with me, and then show them that there's green veg going in it, so next time they actually at least have that connection with it. Like that. That went down the storm with like my friends' kids, and they literally love it now. I've known it's sort of added kind of stuff in.
And I guess as well, like ask them what they would like to eat for dinner. You might do that anyway. But there are the parenting parameters around that. So sometimes it's rather than give them the whole thing. Say, right, we can have this, or this for dinner. Which one do you want? And then they've had the buy-in. So again, that little bit of psychology. I'm not a parent, so I'm not trying to teach you how to parent, I promise. But tips that I've picked up that sometimes help. And I guess another one would be, what would be a really acceptable dinner to them? Can we start to engineer that more towards what would be an acceptable dinner to you? So could we just take one thing, like once a week, once a fortnight, and say, all right, well, we can have that this time, and next time we're going to have that with this as well.
That's the thing.
Okay.
I've got two opposites.
Yeah, because it sounds like one of them's a lot more into it than the other.
Take it in turns.
Always got to make it fair. My niece got really into, she's 8, she's such a fussy eater, but she got really into kale crisps, because you have to like massage the kale to make it a bit more tender, and that's like a really fun like tactile process for her to like massage the coconut oil in, and then because they're called crisps as well, maybe that has an influence. And so that thing of getting them involved in the I know it's not easy at all, and it's not always feasible 7 days a week, but for certain things it can be a good way to sort of
that reminded me as well, different textures, different ways of cooking that same thing. There'll probably be one they like. Let's say they don't like kale, for example. Can we make it crispy? They don't like carrots. Can we cook them in different ways and just try a different thing? Because they might like it. It's a bit of distraction to go around that it's not, can it be prepared in a different way that they actually like?
Yeah, like you can get those machines, spirulina. It's a spiralizer machines, and that's really fun to use because it's again like really interactive, and then it all comes out as like cool spaghetti, and then you can just like make courgette spaghetti and stuff like that, and it's realize that you're eating vegetables, but courgette spaghetti.
Is there anything I haven't covered tonight that you were expecting me to cover that I could answer now, or try and answer?
Seems good.
Good, I'll take that as a good sign.
It's really good. Really interesting, thank you.
Good, glad you enjoyed it. So, if you want to talk to me in the future, I'll be back for another one of these talks. I'll be doing a little bit of work in the shop anyway. I've got, on my social media, I'm at Food Flexibility. I've got a website, foodflexibility.co.uk. My blog is on that website, so if you go to the blog page, there's one on plant-based dieting. I've got some cards here if you want to take my phone number and email address. Feel free just to, and if you've got anything else you want to ask me, just personally, I'll hang around for a little bit before we finish up.
Great, thank you, Tim. Thank you, everybody. We've recently added a little agenda of events as well, so more stuff that's going on here.